My name is Carter Ellison, and 3 weeks ago, I buried my daughter. Her name was Marlo. She was 9 years old. 9 years of lavender-scented baths, knock-knock jokes that made no sense, and wide-eyed wishes whispered to the stars. She thought every shooting star was a wish just waiting for someone kind enough to claim it. She believed pancakes could cure any bad day, that laughter should be loud, and that pain could be made smaller if you just held someone's hand long enough. The morning of her funeral, I parked my car in the lot across from the chapel and stared at the tall white doors as if they might somehow offer me another way in, a different ending. It was early. The sky was gray, not dramatic, not cinematic, just dull, like everything else had been drained of color since the hospital called. I watched people slowly trickle in, heads bowed, some holding tissues before a single tear fell. Friends from work, Marlo's teacher, a few neighbors. I kept watching, holding out for a face that never came. No one from my wife's family showed. Not her parents, not her sister Elise. And they weren't late, they were absent. Intentionally, unforgivably absent. Elise, the one who used to babysit Marlo while we went to marriage counseling. The same Elise who once painted a mural of stars on Marlo's bedroom ceiling. She moved her housewarming party to that same Saturday. Not canceled, rescheduled, so it wouldn't interfere with the catering. I found out when I saw her invitation posted on social media. Pink and gold font. New beginnings at Elise's place. I asked my wife why. Why her sister, her parents, our family, weren't coming to say goodbye. She didn't even look up from her phone. Just sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling like it was any other morning. It was already on the calendar, she said. That was it. No tremble in her voice. No hint of sorrow. Just a schedule. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not in a loud, shattering way. It was quieter than that. Like the sound of a thread snapping in the middle of a storm. It was the moment I stopped being their son-in-law, their brother-in-law, even her husband. I had thought grief would come like a flood, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. But instead, it arrived in the small things. In the silence that stretched too long between us. In the way she didn't reach for my hand anymore. In the casserole dishes left untouched on our porch by kind neighbors. In her absence, not just from the funeral, but from every moment that should have mattered. I walked into the chapel alone. Sat in the front pew, where the family section was marked with white sashes. All empty. I thought maybe someone would change their mind at the last minute. Maybe her father would appear with that stiff, awkward nod he always gave, or her mother would swoop in late with apologies and fake tears. But the only people who came were mine. Friends. Co-workers. Even Marlo's pediatric nurse, who had no obligation to be there on her day off. The service was beautiful, in the way something gut-wrenching can still be tender. Marlo's drawings lined the front. Rockets, stars, suns with faces, and a little cartoon version of me with a cape and the words, "My Daddy Saves Days." Her favorite song played on soft repeat, a silly ukulele tune she loved to hum while brushing her teeth. And as I sat there, numb and crumbling inside, I couldn't stop thinking about Elise's Instagram story, the one where she smiled over a glass of wine in her new kitchen, surrounded by balloons. Grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it sits beside you in silence and dares you to speak first. When the service ended, people came up to hug me, say kind things, share memories. My body was there, but my mind kept wandering back to the words already on the calendar. I couldn't stop looping them in my head like a cursed lullaby. That evening, I sat in the kitchen. The house was too quiet. There were casseroles I didn't eat, flowers I didn't smell, and sympathy cards lined up like reminders of how much the world kept going even as mine collapsed. I picked up one card, unopened. Then another. Then another. My fingers moved, but my mind didn't follow. When I finally checked my phone, it buzzed with a single notification, my wife's Instagram story. She was at Elise's party. There she was, in a red dress, wine glass in hand, smiling like she hadn't just skipped her daughter's funeral. Elise stood beside her, grinning. Their parents sat at a polished dining table behind them. They looked happy, relaxed. Something about that image broke what little was left of my ability to excuse, to rationalize. I zoomed in. I stared. I studied their faces like a puzzle. How could they look so whole, so untouched? I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even undress. I just sat on the couch, watching old home videos of Marlo. The one where she dances in the backyard in a tutu, calling herself Commander Sparkle. The one where she's decorating a pancake with blueberries and grinning at the mess. The one where she's asleep in my lap, and I'm singing something out of tune, and her little hand keeps patting my chest like I'm a drum that belongs to her. I never realized how much sound a house could make when it's grieving. The creaks, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant thump of my own heart. That night, I stopped wondering why they weren't there. I stopped needing an explanation. Because some absences don't need words to be understood. They are loud enough on their own. And me? I was done waiting for them to show up. Done hoping for decency from people who traded a child's farewell for party favors. The aisle was empty that day, but so was their place in our lives. And as much as it hurt, that emptiness became clarity. It told me who I was truly standing with. Who I'd have to be for Marlo. For myself. And maybe, just maybe, for the man who would no longer let silence do the talking. I buried Marlo alone. The wind carried a strange kind of warmth that morning, as if the weather dared to act normal on a day meant to rupture me. The chapel still smelled like lilies and wood polish, a sickly sweet combination that clung to my coat as I stood by her urn. It was small. Too small. Nothing should be that small. Not a container meant to hold the weight of a daughter. But there it sat, sleek, metallic, with a little engraving of stars circling her name. The family row remained untouched. I'd half hoped someone might show. Even then, some naive part of me believed maybe my wife would walk through the doors at the last moment, tears streaming, apologies tumbling out. But she didn't. And neither did her parents. Neither did Elise. The silence behind me spoke louder than any eulogy. A few friends had gathered, my boss, who offered condolences in a voice more fragile than I'd ever heard it. Mrs. Wilkes, our elderly neighbor who brought over soup during Marlo's worst nights, and Sarah, Marlo's fourth-grade teacher, who clutched a drawing Marlo had made of their classroom spaceship project. They didn't just attend. They mourned. The urn sat on a pedestal next to a table filled with her drawings. One had a picture of our backyard, stars over the shed she called her mission base, and me in a cape flying beside her with the words, "To Daddy, who always says yes when Mommy says no." People smiled at that one, eyes glassy with tears. But my wife? Her seat was cold and empty. And I knew exactly where she was. Across town. In a house that used to be my mother's. The one Marlo used to call Grandma's fairy house, with the lavender bushes by the walkway and the creaky porch swing she'd fall asleep on. I found out through a live video Elise posted while I sat staring at my daughter's ashes. A story clip, 20 seconds long, panning across champagne glasses, silver balloons, and a banner that read, "Here's to new beginnings." Elise stood in the center, grinning, wrapped in a silk robe like some suburban royalty. My wife was in the background, wine glass raised, laughing with her father. No one noticed the empty chairs in the chapel. No one noticed the man who couldn't even begin to cry because there was no space for that kind of pain inside him. When the service ended, people filtered out slowly. Some patted my back. Some gave me that soft, pitying smile I now loathed. Mrs. Wilkes kissed my cheek and whispered she was light in a very dim world. I nodded, my voice long gone. After everyone left, I stayed. Just me and the urn. I sat in the front pew and stared at the wood grain of the casket pedestal. Marlo hated silence. She would have hated this part. So I spoke. "Hey, Firefly," I whispered. That was what I used to call her when she wore those ridiculous glow-in-the-dark pajamas and darted around the house pretending to be a meteor. They didn't come. I thought they might, but they didn't. My throat tightened. But I came. I always will. I stayed until the staff gently, respectfully told me they needed to close up. I walked out with the urn in my hands and drove home slowly, almost deliberately, like speeding might undo something final. The house was filled with the kind of noise that only silence can make. The walls echoed memories. Laughter in the hallway. Dance parties in the kitchen. Bubble baths that turned into flood zones. I placed the urn on the mantel beside her favorite drawing. A star map with constellations she made up herself. One was called Giggle Dragon. There were 6 untouched casseroles on the kitchen counter. A dozen sympathy cards stacked beside them. A lasagna I didn't order sat half defrosted in the sink. I leaned on the counter, stared out the window, and opened Instagram. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted to confirm that the absence wasn't a misunderstanding. Maybe I needed to see it to believe how callous people could be. The first photo I saw was of Elise's housewarming cake. 3 tiers, fondant roses, gold lettering that said, "Welcome home." The second was of my wife sitting on a cream sofa, toasting with Elise. The third, a group photo, all smiles, glasses raised, laughter frozen in time. I zoomed in on my wife's face. She looked radiant, euphoric, not like someone who'd missed her child's funeral, not like someone grieving. She was glowing. The caption on Elise's post read, "Surround yourself with people who know how to celebrate life." I almost threw the phone, but I didn't. I just stood there, hands shaking, staring at a woman I no longer recognized. How could someone move on so quickly? How could she smile on the same day I said goodbye to our daughter? I sat at the kitchen table, elbows on the wood, head in my hands. I didn't cry, not that night. I just felt hollow, like every emotion had been wrung out and left to dry. That night, I opened the freezer to find the tub of ice cream Marlo always asked for on bad days. Rocky Road. I scooped out a bowl and sat in front of the TV, flipping through home videos stored on a flash drive. I found the one of her last birthday. She wore a paper crown and had no eyebrows left from the chemo, but she smiled like the world still belonged to her. In the background, my wife was already distant, already somewhere else. That should have told me everything. I watched that clip on repeat until the ice cream melted in the bowl, untouched. And somewhere, miles across town, I imagined champagne flutes clinking together while people toasted to new wallpaper and imported candles. They never saw the grave. They never heard the music Marlo loved. They never walked through the hall of her drawings or saw the way I touched that urn like it might still hold her warmth. And maybe that's the most unforgivable part. Not that they missed the funeral, but that they chose to celebrate something new while something beautiful was being buried. I didn't lose just a daughter that day. I lost the illusion of family. I lost the illusion of love. And I gained something sharp, something cold, clarity. They weren't grieving. They were done. And now, so was I. I used to think regret was a feeling that gnawed at you in the dead of night, that it came sharp, sudden, like stepping barefoot on a nail. But this regret came slow, like rot. It didn't sting at first. It disguised itself as kindness, as reason, as family duty. And by the time I realized what I'd given away, what I'd handed over, it was too late to pretend I hadn't known better. The house Elise now lives in, that pastel-painted, lavender-scented memory, isn't hers. It never was. It was mine, my inheritance. My mother's final gift to me before the cancer robbed her breath and her laughter and her long-winded voicemails about checking the gutters before the rains. I still remember the day she signed it over to me. We sat on that crooked front porch. She wore her faded gardening gloves, and I wore a tie because she said she wanted to do it properly. She handed me the keys and whispered, "Keep it safe. It's yours now. For your family." Back then, I thought I had one. When Marlo got sick, the house sat empty. I didn't have time to repaint or rent it out or even mow the lawn some weeks. I was living in hospitals and keeping track of medication schedules and insurance calls. The world narrowed to syringes, late-night fevers, and the sound of my daughter's breathing through a monitor. That's when Elise offered. She said her lease was ending, and she needed a place just for a few months. Her voice was syrupy sweet on the phone. "Just until I find something permanent," she said. "It's not like you're using it, Carter." She laughed. "Come on, it'll be safe with me." And in my exhaustion, my blind trust, I said yes. I gave her the keys. No lease agreement. No formal document. Just a handshake over wine one evening, and the belief that family wouldn't screw me. That was over a year ago. Since then, Elise redecorated, repainted the walls, replaced the rose bushes my mom planted with plastic palm trees. I saw pictures on social media. New chandeliers. A gold mirror in the entryway that cost more than my last tax return. At first, I thought, she must be renting. Then, she must be asking for my permission soon. But months passed. Then Marlo died. And suddenly, I wasn't just mourning my daughter. I was watching a stranger host parties in my childhood home. Today, something snapped. Maybe it was the third sympathy card from a coworker Elise never met. Maybe it was the memory of Marlo tracing the kitchen tiles with her finger, calling them lava squares. Or maybe it was that I couldn't sit with this ache any longer without doing something. So I went looking. I dug through the hallway closet until I found the old filing cabinet, rusted at the corners, full of expired warranties and forgotten receipts. And there it was, a manila envelope labeled Property, Westwick Lane. My mother's careful handwriting. Inside, the deed, utility records, a mortgage statement marked paid in bold black ink. I unfolded the deed slowly, afraid it would somehow vanish if I blinked too hard. My name was still on it. No transfers. No signatures from Elise. No notary stamps. Nothing. Legally, officially, on paper, Westwick Lane still belonged to me. My fingers trembled as I pulled out my phone and dialed Mr. Kwan, the real estate attorney who'd handled the estate after my mother passed. His voice was calm. Too calm. Like this was just another Tuesday for him. I explained everything. My breath quickened with every sentence. So, I said, does that mean I still own the property? Yes, Mr. Ellison, he said, after a pause. Nothing's changed. You're still the legal owner. There's no record of any lease or transfer. I didn't respond. I just sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, the edges of the deed curling in my lap like some cruel joke. All this time, while they laughed over wine and christened the walls with champagne, I had been the one on the outside, looking in. Not because I wasn't allowed, but because I forgot I had the right to reclaim what was mine. When the call ended, I didn't move. The house felt heavier than usual, like Marlowe's absence had finally made room for all the other truths I'd ignored. I walked through the living room, past the framed picture of her dressed as a superhero, her tiny fist in the air. She once told me, superheroes don't ask permission to save the day, Daddy. They just do it. That was the moment I made up my mind. I printed copies of the deed, photographed everything, labeled each file. Then I texted Mr. Kwan back. Let's begin the process to evict. I want her out. He responded within minutes. Understood. I'll draft the notice. She'll have 48 hours once it's served. 48 hours. I sat down again, this time at the dining table, and stared at my laptop. On the screen was a picture I'd taken a year ago. Marlowe sitting on the front steps of Westwick Lane, wearing a plastic tiara and pretending to be the queen of Grandma's castle. Behind her, the porch was still chipped, the flower beds overgrown, but her smile lit up the whole frame. I hadn't looked at that photo since her diagnosis. Now it hurt to breathe. But beneath the ache, something else stirred. Not rage. Not vengeance. Just clarity. They'd taken enough. They took the funeral. They took the mourning. They took the house and filled it with laughter that didn't belong. And while I'd been busy drowning in guilt and sorrow, they'd lived like nothing happened. Well, something did happen, and I wasn't going to stay quiet about it anymore. That house was never theirs. That laughter wasn't earned. And those keys, those damn keys, were a promise from my mother that I was finally ready to keep. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and left the house. Not to scream, not to argue, just to breathe, to reclaim. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard Marlowe's voice again. Light, sweet, matter of fact. Daddy, don't let bad people win. I won't, Firefly. Not anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the glow of my phone lighting up the ceiling, Marlowe's star stickers overhead dim from years of dust. The silence was brittle. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the soft creak of the floorboards shifting like the house was exhaling memories it didn't want to carry anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elise laughing in that house, my house, wearing heels that probably dug into the same hardwood floors my mom used to polish on Sundays. It was past midnight when I finally opened my text and scrolled back. Not to anything recent, but to the one message I hadn't let myself read since the night before the funeral. My wife's mother had sent it at 10:48 p.m., a text so casual it might as well have been about dinner reservations. So sorry about the loss, Carter, but Elise really needs us this weekend. Hope you understand. I remember staring at it then too, in that same bed, just hours before the service. And I had typed back, I do understand. I hit send because I thought I had to. Because I thought keeping the peace was more important than demanding presents. But reading it again now, I understood something different. I understood that I had always been convenient for them. Not quite family, but useful. I was the guy who picked up the check at dinners, who fixed the leaking faucet at her dad's place, who quietly covered the emergency vet bill for her mom's ancient dog. I had been generous with people who were never generous with me, not out of stupidity, but out of hope. The kind of hope that tells you maybe, just maybe, if you keep giving, they'll eventually see you as theirs. But Marlowe's death didn't bring them closer. It exposed how far they'd always been. I turned on the lamp beside the bed and reached for the folder Mr. Kwan had emailed earlier, the draft eviction notice. Clean, precise, cold in its legality, but warmer in intent than anything they'd done for me in years. I read it twice, then again. The words, "You are hereby required to vacate the premises within 48 hours," had a rhythm to them. They didn't scream. They didn't plead. They simply stated a boundary I should have set long ago. I thought about every time I'd made excuses for them. Every birthday where they showed up late or not at all. Every holiday I spent as the chauffeur, the errand boy, the one who didn't mind helping out. And during Marlowe's illness, while I juggled night shifts and ER visits. They posted vacation photos and asked how she was doing via group texts, rarely individual. When she passed, I didn't get a single call from them. Just that one text. And silence. I sat down at the dining table in the dark and started writing. Not a letter. Just truths. On napkins. On scrap paper. On the back of sympathy cards I hadn't thrown out yet. A kind of inventory of the years I lost pretending things were fine. I paid for the house you celebrated in. I held her hand while her fever climbed to 105. You said you had brunch plans. I asked you once to pick her up from school. You said, that's not our responsibility. I forgave you every time, even when you didn't ask. By sunrise, I had a small pile of these truth notes. I didn't plan to send them. They weren't for them. They were for me. For the man who had spent too long swallowing his voice just to keep people who didn't love him comfortable. When the morning finally broke through the curtains, I dressed in silence, printed the eviction papers, and placed them in a manila envelope. I slid it into my bag and left the house without coffee. The walk to Mr. Kwan's office felt longer than usual, not in distance, but in weight. Every step carried a decade of held-back frustration. Every breath was a quiet goodbye to the version of me that needed their validation. Mr. Kwan greeted me with his usual calm, polite tone. He reviewed the final document with me paragraph by paragraph. I signed it. That's it, he said, tapping the paper. We'll have it delivered this afternoon. Once it's served, they'll have 2 days to vacate. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. As I walked out of his office, I felt something in my chest shift. Not ease, exactly. Not yet. But something uncoiled. A tightness loosening. A breath I didn't know I'd been holding for months. Back at home, I sat on the couch, phone in hand, staring at that old text from her mother again. Hope you understand. I laughed, bitter, hollow. I understood, all right. I understood that love that comes with conditions isn't love at all. That day, I spent hours going through drawers, closets, folders, organizing documents, shredding old bills. I found a photo of Marlowe on her 2nd birthday, her entire face covered in frosting, arms raised like she'd conquered the world. I framed it and placed it next to the front door. That afternoon, I got a call from the delivery service confirming the eviction notice had been posted. Elise had answered the door, they said. No words were exchanged. She took the envelope, closed the door. That night, I slept for 6 hours straight, for the first time since the hospital called. I didn't dream. I didn't toss. I woke up with my hands still over my chest, as if I were holding something safe there in the dark. The next morning, I opened a new text thread and typed a message to my wife. But I didn't send it. Instead, I deleted the thread altogether. Because I didn't need her response. This wasn't about reconciliation or revenge. It was about space. About reclaiming what I should never have had to ask for. Elise had 48 hours. I had all the time I needed to rebuild. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where to start. The knock came at 9:04 a.m. I watched from the kitchen window as Elise opened the front door of my mother's house, my house, to find 2 uniformed officers standing on her porch. One handed her the envelope while the other stood back, arms crossed, impassive. Elise squinted at the documents, then looked up as if expecting someone to jump out and say, "Gotcha." But no one did. There were no camera crews. Just the quiet dawn, the crunch of a bird feeder swinging in the breeze, and me standing across the street in my car, engine off, watching it unfold. She blinked once, twice, then let out this dry, stunned laugh and said something I couldn't hear. But I could read lips well enough. "Carter?" she asked, looking past the officers like she could sense me. "This is petty." I stepped out of the car and walked across the street, my hands in my jacket pockets, the envelope already served. "No," I said when I reached her porch. "This is legal." I didn't yell, didn't argue, just stood there and let the silence do its work. Elise stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "I'm your sister-in-law," she said, a trace of disbelief in her voice like it should matter. "You're doing this to family?" I tilted my head. "You weren't at the funeral. You weren't at the hospital. You weren't anywhere she needed you to be. You made it clear a long time ago what you thought family was worth. Before she could respond, a silver Lexus pulled up, tires grinding the driveway gravel like something in a low-budget western. Her parents climbed out, her mother wearing pearls and her father already red in the face. Miriam marched toward me with purpose, a handbag swinging like it might be weaponized. "What is this?" she snapped. "What are you doing, Carter?" "I'm reclaiming what's mine," I said flatly. Frank didn't say a word. He just stood there behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight, as if he were watching the weather misbehave. Typical. "You can't evict your own family," Miriam hissed. "I can," I said. "And I have." "That house was a gift," Elise chimed in, waving the paperwork like it was a child's drawing. "You gave it to me." "No. I gave you keys. I never gave you the deed." I pulled a folded copy from my jacket and held it up. "And unless you forged my signature, and I doubt even you are that stupid, you have no legal claim." Miriam's eyes narrowed. "You're weaponizing grief," she said, turning tragedy into some kind of revenge. I stepped back, almost stunned by the nerve. "Weaponizing grief?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean like skipping a child's funeral to attend a wine tasting? You mean like calling her death a minor event, and then throwing a party the same weekend? Is that what you call grief now?" Elise crossed her arms. I was trying to move on. "She was 9, I said, my voice sharp for the first time. "You moved into her grandmother's house like you earned it. You hosted parties in the place where Marlowe used to draw rocket ships on the walls. You tore out her flower bed. You painted over her stars." No one said a word. I turned to leave. "Carter," Miriam called out, her voice quieter now. "She's gone. Nothing we do will bring her back." I paused, my back to them. The early morning wind rustled the bushes along the driveway, and I could hear the clink of Elise's champagne glasses through the open window. I turned around slowly. "She's not gone to me," I said. "She's everywhere. She's in the drawings you boxed up and shoved in the garage. She's in the windows you replaced because the light was too warm. She's in every inch of that house. And I won't let you erase her so you can keep pretending you were ever part of her life." Miriam shook her head. "You've lost your mind." "No," I said, stepping off the porch. "I found my clarity. That night, I installed new locks. Not just on the front door, but on every door, garage, basement, side entry. I added a keypad to the back gate and made sure the motion lights were working. Mr. Kwan had the restraining order paperwork prepared and ready in case things escalated, and I wasn't about to take chances. People like Elise don't leave quietly. I was halfway through setting up the new security cameras when my phone buzzed. "Motion detected in backyard." I clicked the feed. The screen lit up with grainy footage of Elise climbing over the side fence, a baseball bat in hand. She wore leggings, sneakers, and that same wild expression I remembered from the night she tried to crash Marlowe's 3rd birthday by bringing a replacement cake just because she didn't like mine. Except this time, she wasn't smiling. She walked straight to the back window, the one next to the dining room, and smashed it. Glass exploded. Alarms blared. My phone lit up with notifications. I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. I called 911 and sat on the porch, phone in hand, waiting for the sirens. It was a strange kind of calm, sitting there with my elbows on my knees, watching the red and blue lights flash down the street. A neighbor peeked out through a window. Another stepped outside in slippers. I stayed seated. The officers cuffed her without a fight. Elise screamed something about injustice, about grief, and being pushed out. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched the woman who called me petty while she was escorted down the steps of the house she tried to steal. One officer looked at me and nodded. That was all. The doors slammed shut behind them. I stood up and looked around. No chaos. No panic. Just peace, threaded with the sharp edges of justice. Grief doesn't look the same on everyone. Some people wear it like ash. Some hide it in laughter. Some drink it away in stemless glasses over cream couches and real estate lies. But me? I wore mine like armor now, and it fit just fine. Elise was in handcuffs when the flash from her porch light caught the glint of metal. She wasn't crying when they put her in the back of the squad car. She was smirking, like she knew something I didn't. Like she thought this was the first act of a show she'd already rehearsed, not the consequence of a line she'd crossed long ago. Her parents were there, of course. Her father, silent and red-faced, pacing by the mailbox. Her mother, Miriam, shouting at the officers, "You can't arrest family." This is a misunderstanding. But there was no misunderstanding. Not this time. The body camera footage would show everything. Elise scaling the side fence like a teenager, gripping a baseball bat like it was her birthright, then shattering the dining room window with the same recklessness she used to call passion. That same camera would catch me calmly handing over the footage from my own security system, time-stamped and backed up to the cloud. No raised voices. No threats. Just facts, lit up in pixels and glass. I pressed charges. There was a brief silence after I signed the paperwork. Mr. Kwan didn't question it. The officer didn't blink. Elise's parents didn't try to stop me. But my wife did. Or should I say, the woman who used to be my wife. She texted me at 2:14 a.m., a message so short it almost didn't deserve a reply. You're making this worse for everyone. I stared at it for 10 full minutes. Then I locked my phone and let it buzz in the dark while I sat on the floor beside Marlo's old dresser, going through the things I hadn't touched since the hospital. Her telescope was still there, one lens cracked from the last time she dragged it across the porch too fast. A notebook of stars she'd been naming for months: Daddy Star, Rocket Puddle, Elbow Nebula. Each page written in that clumsy but earnest handwriting, still brimming with wonder. No one at that party had mentioned her name. Not once. Not in passing. Not in grief. Not even in courtesy. Elise's arrest, though, that had their full attention. The next morning, I woke up to a new storm. Elise had posted a video montage on Facebook. Not a reel of her smashing windows, of course. Not that truth. Just her crying on the porch, her mascara running in the way only social media grief does. Background music, a soft piano track. The caption read, "Some grief comes in waves. Some in lawsuits." I stared at it, almost impressed by the audacity. In one carefully edited sequence, she turned a criminal act into a public appeal. There she was, framed against my mother's porch like some tragic figure. A victim. A woman robbed of stability by a bitter, grieving brother-in-law. She even included a childhood photo of herself and my wife, arm in arm. The comments started rolling in within minutes. "This is heartbreaking, Elise. Stay strong, girl. Some people never know how to deal with pain." Then, finally, a different tone. "I was at the funeral," one comment read. It wasn't grief that was missing. It was them. I clicked the profile. Marlo's teacher, Sarah Raymond. She had been there in the front pew, holding back tears as she talked about Marlo's curiosity, her dream of becoming an astronaut, how she used to ask if aliens had bedtime stories too. The comment had a dozen likes in an hour. Others followed. "A nurse from the hospital. He stayed by Marlo's side every night. I never saw any of you there. One of my neighbors. Funny how y'all were too busy for the funeral, but not for the camera." It was like a dam cracked, not all at once, but enough to leak through the truth. Elise's facade, once so tightly managed, started unraveling in real time. And I didn't have to say a word. I didn't have to comment. I didn't even need to defend myself. Because grief, real grief, doesn't need a soundtrack or a filter. It shows up in the dark when there's no one to perform for. It sits with you in hospital chairs when your kid is too weak to speak, and you hum lullabies just to feel like you're still doing something. It shows up in the days after, when her toothbrush is still in the cup and you can't bring yourself to move it. Elise didn't know that grief. Neither did her parents. Neither, it seemed, did my wife. By noon, Mr. Kwan had submitted the restraining order paperwork. By 2, the video had been taken down, probably not by choice. Reports were piling up. People were watching. But what struck me most was the silence from the people who once called themselves my family. Not one phone call. Not one text to apologize, to clarify, to ask how I was. Just a single follow-up from my wife. "We should have handled this privately." Privately. Like Marlo's pain should have been tucked into corners and whispered over hors d'oeuvres. Like my heartbreak was a matter of discretion. Like the funeral should have been canceled because Elise had catering. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a folder on my desktop titled Truth. Inside were documents, the deed, the footage, the text messages Elise and my wife had exchanged, some cruel, some condescending, all real. I wasn't planning to post them. Not unless I had to. But they existed now. And they gave me something I hadn't had in a long time: control. I turned off my phone and sat down at Marlo's little desk. It was too small for my knees, but I didn't care. I pulled out a sheet of paper and started writing. "Dear Marlo," I began. "Today, the world saw a lie, and then it started seeing the truth. It was the first letter I'd written her since she passed, and though I knew she wouldn't read it, it felt right. Like stitching something back together, one word at a time. I ended it simply. They called this grief. But you knew better. You always did. Then I folded it, slipped it into the front of her star notebook, and lit the candles on the windowsill. Outside, the night crept in. The house was quiet, but not hollow. Not anymore. Let them spin stories. Let them edit their pain. I didn't need to. I had the truth. And it looked just like her smile. There's a kind of betrayal that isn't loud. It doesn't come with slamming doors or shouted curses. It comes in numbers. Quiet, clinical. Just digits on a screen. A slow erosion disguised as routine. That was how I learned the truth about the people I had once called family, not through their words, but through their spending. It started the morning after Elise's video disappeared. The public support for her had dried up almost as fast as it had appeared. But I wasn't interested in their reactions anymore. I was interested in the trail they left behind, what they thought I'd never bother to look for. I opened my online banking and scrolled through the years I had stopped paying attention to. Pages of transfers, authorizations, purchases made in my name. Charges I didn't remember. Debits I couldn't explain. And then it hit me like a slap across the face. There were regular transfers to my in-laws. Small at first. A few $100s every other month. Then they got bigger. One was labeled Miriam Medical. Another was Frank Auto. They weren't itemized. Just draining me slowly while I thought I was paying for things that mattered. School supplies, hospital parking, groceries during chemo weeks. I kept digging. Found a car lease in my wife's name. Then another. Both for luxury SUVs she never drove. I remembered asking her about the second vehicle once, and she waved it off. It's Elise's. Just helping her with credit. It's a family thing. A family thing. I pulled every statement from the last 3 years and laid them out on the table. It took hours. Pages and pages of transactions. I categorized them. Household, hospital, Marlowe's treatments. But then there were the ones that stood out like bruises, spa visits, boutique purchases, airfare during weeks I remember being too broke for gas. That's when Noel showed up. He knocked on the back door with a bag of groceries and that tired, cautious smile he always wore around me now, like he wasn't sure if I was going to cry or scream. "You sleeping at all?" he asked, placing the bag down and kicking off his boots. "Not really," I said, "but I'm functional. That counts for something." He looked at the spread of bank statements. "You building a lawsuit or a time machine?" "Both," I said. "One to undo the damage. The other to make sure it never happens again." Noel sat with me and helped sort through it all. We made columns. Needs, luxuries, lies. In a single afternoon, I watched 3 years of my life get mapped out like a crime scene. And somewhere between Elise's second trip to Miami and Miriam's boutique linen expenses, it became clear they had been siphoning from me like it was owed. While Marlo was fighting for her life, they were living theirs without restraint. Noel scrolled through some old emails I had archived. He found one from Elise to my wife, dated during the peak of Marlowe's treatments. Subject line: "He'll never walk away." The body read: "Just keep him focused on the hospital stuff. He's too loyal. He won't even notice the house is basically ours. He's not strong enough to walk away. He'll never take it back." I stared at it. My name in their mouths like a joke. My loyalty treated like currency to be traded. I had always suspected they pitted me. But now I knew. They exploited me. Noel placed a hand on my shoulder. "You still want to pursue charges?" "I want to pursue clarity," I said. The house was step one. This. I waved at the pile of papers. This is everything else. We spent the next few days cataloging everything. Mr. Kwan helped me draft an affidavit. A forensic accountant friend of Noel's reviewed the documents and confirmed what I already knew: fraud, misuse of funds, identity manipulation. I hadn't just been generous. I'd been used. It wasn't just Elise. It wasn't just Miriam. My wife had known. She'd signed off on the leases, authorized the bank transfers. Some of the money used for their weekend getaways had come directly from a health fund I'd set up for Marlo. That broke something in me I didn't know could still break. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that while I was holding my daughter's hand through rounds of chemotherapy, the woman I loved was sitting in wine bars, laughing with her sister, spending the money I saved by skipping meals and selling my car. I remembered one night clearly. I was sitting on a hospital bench outside Marlo's room. I hadn't eaten in 13 hours. I texted my wife, Can you bring me something? Anything. Even a granola bar. She responded, busy. Ask a nurse. That same night, there was a charge at a downtown steakhouse. For two. I never asked her about it. I just told myself she was coping in her own way. But now I knew. She wasn't coping. She was capitalizing. That night, I sat alone in the living room with the ledger we'd created. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just read every line like it was scripture. Like it would finally explain why people could be so calculating while pretending to love you. Noelle poured me a drink. What now? I finish it, I said. All of it. No more mercy. I turned on my laptop and began typing a statement. Not for court. Not for the internet. For myself. A testimony to the man I'd become. A line in the sand. They thought I was too kind to act. Too broken to rebuild. But what they never understood was that Marlo gave me strength in her final days that none of them could touch. And now, I wasn't walking away. I was walking through. She showed up with flowers. Of course she did. Lilies. The kind funeral homes overuse and nobody really likes. The kind Marlo always said smelled like grown-up sadness. My wife stood on the front porch of the apartment I'd moved into, small, bare, and quiet, wearing makeup like armor and a coat I'd given her last Christmas. She looked like someone trying to wear the past like a costume, pretending it still fit. I didn't answer the door right away. I just watched her through the peephole, hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the bouquet, probably rehearsing whatever she'd come to say. The porch felt colder than usual. It had rained that morning. The wooden steps were still wet, the air heavy with the kind of chill that settles under your skin and makes even flowers seem sharp. When I finally opened the door, I didn't say anything. I just leaned against the frame and waited. She blinked, surprised by how little of me was willing to meet her halfway. Carter, she said, soft, almost pleading. I thought maybe we could talk. I looked at the bouquet. Those for her, or for me? For both of you, she said. She didn't like lilies, I replied. She flinched. They didn't have daisies. Then you should have come empty-handed, I said. She sighed and shifted her weight, searching for an opening I wasn't offering. I know you're angry. Stop, I interrupted. Don't come here thinking this is about anger. Anger was weeks ago. This is aftermath. She bit her lip. Her voice cracked just slightly. Marlo wouldn't want this. The fighting. The lawyers. The police. Don't, I said, the word sharp as frost. Don't say her name like it buys you anything. She went quiet then, and for a moment, I could see her recalculating, trying to find the version of me who would still fold under the weight of shared history. But he was gone. Grief had changed the locks. She tried again. I came because I want to make things right. No, I said. You came because Elise got arrested, and your parents are humiliated. You came because the story cracked, and now you're trying to tape it back together before it spreads any further. That's not fair. Neither was missing your daughter's funeral. Her eyes welled up, and I wondered if it was real or just part of the performance she'd gotten so good at. The same eyes that stayed dry the day I told her Marlo's chemo had failed. The same ones that looked at me blankly when I said we needed to start hospice care. She was my daughter too, Carter, she whispered. I stepped outside then, closing the door behind me, not letting her in, not into the apartment, not into the space I'd finally carved out from the mess of them. You don't get to say that now, I said, standing just inches away. You forfeited that when you picked a party over a grave. She was my baby, she said, voice cracking. Then why weren't you there? I asked. Why wasn't your grief loud enough to interrupt Elise's housewarming playlist? She shook her head. You think I didn't cry? You think I didn't mourn? I stared at her, 1,000 memories running through my mind, none of them recent, none of them redeeming. I think you processed it like an inconvenience. I think you put it in a box, labeled it too painful, and shoved it into the corner of your perfect little family dynamic. And I think the only reason you're here is because for the first time in your life, consequences showed up at your front door wearing a badge. She started crying then. Finally. But it didn't move me. You're ruining everything, she said, her voice breaking. Elise could lose her job. My parents are embarrassed. The whole neighborhood's talking good, I said. Let them. She looked stunned, like she didn't expect me to say it out loud. I'm not trying to destroy anyone, I continued. But I'm done playing the quiet one. The helpful one. The man who swallows every insult to keep the peace. We can fix this, she pleaded. Let's settle this quietly. No more courts. No more scenes. I reached behind me and slowly closed the front door, the click of the latch louder than any shouted word. I took a deep breath and looked at her one last time. I spent years giving you grace, I said. When you pulled away. When you lied. When you left me to hold Marlowe's hand alone at night. When you told me I was too emotional for crying after her final breath. I gave you all the space you needed, and you filled it with indifference. She didn't reply, just looked down at the wet bouquet, now trembling in her hands. That house, I added, is going to be something better now. We filed the donation papers this morning. It's going to be a community center for grieving parents. Counseling rooms, art therapy for kids, resources for people who don't have anyone left. Her head snapped up. You're giving it away? No, I said. I'm giving it purpose. She took a step back, eyes wide. That's insane. That was your mother's house. It still is, I said. And she would have hated what you turned it into. She stood there for a long time after that, clutching the flowers like they might redeem her. But they didn't. They just wilted slowly in her hands as the cold crept in. Eventually, she walked away. No final words. No promises. Just retreat. And I let her. An hour later, Mr. Kwan called to confirm the transfer had been filed. The Westwick Lane property was no longer under my name. It belonged now to a foundation that would turn it into something hopeful, something healing. I stepped out onto the now quiet porch and looked up at the sky. The wind had picked up. The clouds had parted just enough for the sun to break through in scattered rays. I didn't feel victorious, but I felt clean. I wasn't burning their world down. I was just reclaiming mine, and it had never felt more hollow, but more mine, than in that moment. The hallway of my apartment used to be just that, a hallway. Plain, white walls, a coat rack that always leaned a little left, a scuffed baseboard from when we'd moved in too fast, dragging boxes without care. But now it had become something else, something sacred, a gallery, a place where Marlowe still lived in fragments and color. Her drawings started appearing the week after I donated the house. At first, I pulled them out of storage just to remember her, but remembering wasn't enough. So I framed them, one by one. Gold frames, silver frames, dollar store black ones, it didn't matter. I just needed them up where I could see them, where the world could see her the way I did. There was a rocket ship with glitter stars, a sunflower with each petal labeled as a different day of the week, a picture of me holding her hand, except in the drawing my hands were enormous and round, and my head was shaped like a potato. Above that one, she'd written, "My daddy makes sad days better." That was the one that stopped me cold every time I passed it. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't poetic, but they were hers. They were true. At least, they had been. I found myself staring at that particular drawing more than I should have. Some nights I'd stand there for 20 minutes, arms crossed, leaning against the wall, letting my eyes blur until the crayon lines softened. I wasn't trying to relive anything. I wasn't even trying to grieve anymore. I was just trying to hold on to the proof that she was here and that who I had been to her still mattered, even if everything else around me had crumbled. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Not an email. Not a text. A real letter. Handwritten in uneven print, folded into a pink envelope decorated with stickers of unicorns and strawberries. I almost missed it, caught between two bills and a flyer for a pizza joint I'd never try. It was from Lily. She lived next door. A quiet girl, maybe 8 or 9, with a stutter and a habit of watching me water my balcony plants from behind her curtains. Her mom had introduced us once, a quick wave in the hallway followed by an awkward silence. I never knew how to talk to kids after Marlowe. Every one of them felt like a window into something I'd lost. But this letter, it hit me differently. Dear Mr. Carter, it began, written in purple gel pen. I saw the stars in your hallway. My mommy said they were your daughters. I think they are very pretty. My favorite is the one with the girl in the cape. It made me smile. So I drew you a picture too. Because my daddy says when you miss someone, drawing helps. I hope you smile too. Folded inside was a crayon sketch of a stick figure man with a little girl holding his hand, both of them wearing superhero capes. Below it, she'd written, "You made me smile." That was it. That one sentence. That tiny picture. That shaky handwriting. And I broke. Not in a loud way. I didn't fall to the floor or scream or curse the sky. I just sank to the edge of the hallway and let the tears come in silence. They rolled down my face like they'd been waiting for permission. I clutched the drawing like it was glass, like it might disappear if I didn't hold it right. For the first time in weeks, the ache inside me didn't feel like it was dragging me under. It felt purposeful. It felt like love reshaped itself into something I could still carry. I framed Lily's picture that evening and placed it right beside Marlowe's giggle dragon drawing. Two girls with capes. One memory. One gift. Later that night, I went to visit Marlowe. The cemetery was quiet. No wind. No birds. Just the sound of leaves brushing against stone. I brought daisies, real ones this time. Not lilies. Not apologies wrapped in cellophane. Just the flowers she always picked from the park and stuffed into empty juice bottles. I knelt by her marker, brushing away a few fallen twigs. The engraved stars around her name were worn now, but I traced them anyway, as if my fingertips could bring them back to life. I got a letter today, I whispered. From Lily. She liked your drawings. Said they made her smile. The wind picked up slightly, lifting the edge of the paper I'd brought with me. I'd written a new letter for her. I didn't read it out loud. Some things are meant just for the quiet. As I sat there, I thought about all the things that were gone. The house, the marriage, the illusion of family. But I also thought about what had survived. Marlowe's joy, her art, the version of me that existed when she looked up at me and said, "You're the best part of my day." I hadn't been that man in a long time, but maybe, just maybe, I could be again. As I stood to leave, I placed Lily's drawing in a plastic sleeve and pinned it next to the daisies, right against the stone. Let the world see that even in the mess, beauty still grew. Even in grief, someone else could find light. Back at home, I walked the hallway slowly, stopped in front of each drawing. Marlowe's voice echoed in my head, not as a ghost, but as a reminder. "You made me smile too, Firefly," I whispered. I turned out the lights, but the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling weeks ago, Marlowe's stars, lit up faintly. Not bright, not bold, but enough. Enough to walk by. Enough to begin again. The community center smelled like fresh paint and hope. There was still sawdust in the corners, and one of the overhead lights in the art room flickered faintly, but it was open. Official. Alive. Where Elise once poured wine for strangers who barely knew her, now stood shelves of art supplies, crayons, glue sticks, acrylics, and plastic bins. The living room where my mother's antique cabinet used to stand had been cleared out and turned into a circle of beanbags and low tables. On the wall above it hung a sign painted by a volunteer, "Grief Through Art, Honoring Marlowe." I stood at the entrance for a long time that morning, coffee in one hand, my other stuffed deep into my pocket like I was afraid I'd change my mind. A few parents wandered in, uncertain, like they weren't sure if it was okay to be seen here, vulnerable. Some held the hands of children who kept their eyes low and voices lower. Grief does that, makes people shrink into themselves until someone shows them it's safe to take up space again. Noel stood behind a folding table in the corner, greeting people as they arrived. He caught my eye, raised a hand, and I gave a tight nod. He was the only one who knew what this moment meant to me, what it cost. I hadn't planned on speaking, but someone asked me to. A woman whose son had lost his twin in a car crash. She clutched his hand so tightly I wondered if he could still feel his fingers. "It would help," she said, "just hearing from someone who made it through." So I stepped up. No stage, no microphone, just a circle of folding chairs and the quiet murmur of sadness pressed against healing. "My name is Carter," I said. 3 months ago, I buried my daughter, Marlowe. She was 9 years old. She liked pancakes with too much syrup, wore capes to school whenever she could get away with it, and thought every shooting star was a wish meant just for her. A few people smiled. She taught me how to see the world again, not just the bright parts, all of it. She made sadness look like something temporary, like rain you just had to wait out. I paused, looked at the group. Some nodded. One man closed his eyes. "I lost more than her," I continued. "I lost my marriage, my sense of family, my trust in people I thought would stand beside me when things got hard. But somehow, out of all of that, this happened. This space, this room, you." Someone coughed softly. A child drew on a pad in the corner with shaky concentration. A little girl whispered something to her dad, and he rubbed her back gently. "I'm not whole," I said, "but I'm standing. And sometimes, that's enough." There was no applause, just silence. And for once, it felt holy. After the workshop, I helped a boy named Kyle clean up a spilled jar of markers. He didn't say much, but when I handed him a paper towel, He looked at me and said, "Your daughter likes stars?" "Yeah," I said, kneeling beside him. "She thought they were just dreams waiting to be caught." He nodded. "My sister liked clouds. She used to say they were pillows for angels." That night, I sat alone on my apartment porch. A cup of tea steamed in my hands, and the sky stretched wide above me, dotted with pinpricks of light. Lavender spilled across the horizon as the sun set, her favorite color. The porch was quiet, but not empty. The peace didn't come with a shout or some grand gesture. It came like this: steady, earned, real. I thought about the last few months, about how easily I'd let myself become a shadow in other people's lives, how I'd bent backward for people who couldn't be bothered to kneel beside a child's grave, how I'd excused betrayal in the name of family, and how, even in all that, I had found my way back to myself. I wasn't the man who begged anymore. I wasn't the man who stayed silent while others laughed at my expense. I wasn't the husband who made himself smaller to avoid being told he was too much. I was the father who stayed. I was the man who built something when they tried to tear me down. I was the person who turned a house of pain into a home for healing. And somewhere in the stars, I believed Marlo saw that. Maybe she saw the kids drawing rockets and suns and sadness with crayons in the room she once called her own. Maybe she knew that her legacy wasn't in how she died, but in how I lived after her. I closed my eyes and let the